Oh yeah, 63b. Sorry, about 2/3 down the page. So yesterday we discussed whether if a woman says she's married or father says he married his daughter, and somebody else comes along and claims to be the mate, whether he's believed or not. So if the father says he marries off his daughter and a prospective mate comes forward and says he's the guy who gave the Kiddushin, so we believe him. Okay. And the reason for that is because if the guy's lying, he's going to have to deal with the father. However, if the woman says she got married, she accepted Kiddushin, she doesn't know from whom, and a guy comes forward and says it was me, we do not allow them to get married because we're concerned that she sort of is stuck. She cannot get married to anybody at this point. She claims to have been married to somebody, and we're concerned that maybe she'll just live with him, even if he wasn't the potential suitor. So the question is, what's the story with regard to Skila? If she's adulterous, do we believe her to punish her and give her capital punishment? So Rav says ain't cycling. Rav Asi Amar cycling. Rav ain't cycling. Kehem nirachman al avli isur like tol lehemni. The Torah does not believe. The Torah believes the father. We'll see it in a moment. The Torah believes the father to talk about his daughter's Kiddushin because the father says as bitin etzati leishazeh. The father is the one who claims by Mitzvah Shemra where his daughter is falsely accused of adultery. The father is one that says, I gave my daughter to you. Clearly, he's believed to say that. But that's only with regard to her marital status, not with regard to giving capital punishment. And Rav Asi Amar cycling the Kula Milsahem Rachmana, the Torah believes him with regard to everything. Once it's established by the father that she's married, then if she's adulterous, we would rely on that to give her capital punishment. Amar Rav Asi, Madina by Maris Skatush ain't cycling. Rav Asi agrees that when she says I've received Kiddushin, that's not sufficient to give her capital punishment. And the Gemara asks a question. Rav Asi says Hani Shmaitz and Didim Rav Sanigri. What my statement is, it breaks the roofs. It's difficult to understand. Hashta Uma b'makom shem bo lichnes kainis amrit cyclin. 1 second. In a scenario where the father says that she's engaged, we believe the potential mate to be able to marry her, which means in a certain sense that's a leniency. That means that we're not believing the father. If we believe the father completely, then we should not allow her to remarry, because then we shouldn't trust the other guy's claim. So to the contrary, the fact that they can remarry indicates that there is to some extent less of a belief in the father. We don't trust the father completely. And yet we still, according to the Gemara, we would still give the penalty of skila. Whereas in the scenario where the woman says that she is where the woman says that she is where the woman says that she's married, in that scenario we do not allow her to remarry. That's because we believe her very much, to the extent that we don't trust this other guy to claim that he's the mate. And if that's the case, then why would we not give her skila, capital punishment, in that scenario? And the Gemara says, "V'lohi," it's not difficult to understand. La'av hemni rachmana, l'didah lehemni rachmana. The reason basically is because the father is sort of an independent. The father's not getting married. The father's marrying off his daughter. So because the father is an independent verifier of the story, that's why we believe the guy in this when the father claims to have made the Kiddushin. But when the woman herself makes the claims, then we're concerned that maybe she'll just fall in love with the guy because of a lack of other choices. So therefore, that's why she's not believed. And that's why the result is that even though the truth is that the woman is, in a certain sense, the reason why the woman is not believed is because we have a problem of trust here. She's really stuck. She can't marry anybody. So maybe she'll agree to marry this guy and claim that he's saying the truth because she has no other choices. Where the father's not getting married to him anyway, because he can verify the story. That's why we trust the suitor when he says that he's the one who gave the Kiddushin. Okay, Rav Chisda says echad zev echad zeh ein cycling. Neither scenario do we give capital punishment. Az Rav Chisda tameid, Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says b'ni zeh ben teisha shanim v'yem echad. The guy says, my son is 9 years old. Biti zu bas gimel shanim. My daughter is 3 years old. 9 years old, his intercourse is considered carnal. Less than that, it's not considered a carnal act. Similarly, with a daughter who's more than 3 years old. Bas gimel shanim v'yem echad nemon lekarban avaloi lemakas. They're believed to. 1 second. Neman lekarban means that if somebody accidentally, however that happened, had an affair with either a 9-year-old boy or a 3-year-old girl, they'd bring a carbon to atone for it. Yeah. But they would not get punished. If they did it intentionally, they would not get punished. You wouldn't believe the father. Similarly, if a guy says, he says, my son's 13, my daughter is 12, meaning that they're sort of adults in the sense that they can be punished under court law. They're believed with regards to consider anything that they do. If they sanctify something, if they make a neder, then we would believe him and we would say that the neder is valid because they're adults. But with regard to determining whether they're adults to actually receive a penalty, we would not believe the father. Okay, Kidashti es biti. 1 second, yeah. Guy says, I married off my daughter. I married her and divorced her when she's a child. And she currently is still a child. Nemon, he's believed, meaning she's under the age of 12 and a half. And that's not 12 and a half, but it's not a precise number. It's right. It would be she has not had more than 6 months of puberty. I married her off and divorced her when she was a child. By the way, this divorce here is divorce from Erison. Right? So they had Erison and the father receives the divorce. But the problem is he made the statement, right now she's an adult. He's not believed. In other words, we only trust the father when she is a child, not when she's an adult. Once she's an adult, he's not believed to say, I married you off. He claims that she was captive and he redeemed her. He's not believed. What's the difference here with regard to saying she was captive and he redeemed her? If she was a captive, she would not be kosher to marry Kain, because captives are presumed to have been raped. Okay, and second. Similarly, if he says he married her and divorced her, that also invalidates her from marrying a Kain. So Gemara says, Maishna Seifa. Why is it? Why is there a difference when she's a child or when she's an adult? So the Gemara says, this is the first response to the Gemara, which the Gemara will later fall off from. The first argument is Reit Shabiyadeh Seif Allah Biyadeh. When she's a child, it's within his control to be able to invalidate her from marrying a Kayan. Whereas it's not within his control once she's an adult. So the Gemara says it's not in his control. It is in his control. In other words, even if she's an adult, when she was a child, he could have married her to a person who would make her invalid to a Kayan, and that would be a chol. A chol makes the woman that marries him into a chol as well, and therefore she would not be able to marry a Kayan. The Gemara says holy kasha. It's not true. He could not have married her to a chol because marrying a chol does not invalidate you to a Kayan. And this is the opinion of Rabbi Dovid. We'll see this later in the parak and later in the Masechta. Rabbi Dovid's opinion is when Yehudah Omer to Omer b'nais Yisrael mikveh tahara l'chalalim. See, have a chol. What's a chol according to Rabbi Dovid? A Kayan marries a divorcee. They have a child, a son. He's a chol. It can't serve. Not only can't he serve, but his children can't marry a Kayan either. His children are also chalalim, except that according to Rabbi Dovid, a chol marries a regular kosher girl. Yisraelis, their kids are kosher, and their kids can marry Kayan. Sort of a mikvah, they purify chalalim. So now all of a sudden they're Yisraelim, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with a Yisrael marrying a chalal. There's no prohibition. Yisrael is allowed to marry a chal. Okay, mikvah tahara chalalim. So the Gemara says, "V'Rabbi Yehudah asila mamzer." It's within his control to marry her off to a mamzer, and if he marries her to a mamzer, then she's also invalid to a Kayan. So even though it's prohibited, Yisrael is not Israelis. A Yisrael woman is not allowed to marry a mamzer. He could do it anyway, and if he did it, then she would not be able to marry a Kayan. The Gemara says, like the opinion of Rabbi Kiva, the Amar ein Kiddushin toivsim b'chayvei lavin. It says Kiddushin does not work with regard to chayvei lavin. Okay, in other words, according to Rabbi Kiva, there's no Kiddushin here at all. Generally speaking, we say that when the penalty is kares, excision, or a death penalty, there's no Kiddushin. However, Rabbi Kiva extends that. He says even if the penalty is only a lav, only a violation of a commandment that would incur the penalty of malchus, there also is no Kiddushin. So therefore, you can't marry her off to a mamzer. Why not? If you can't, there's no Kiddushin. There's no Kiddushin. There's no way to marry her. Most of the arayas, the relationships are marital relationships, and it's not within the father's right to allow somebody to sleep with her. It's only within the father's right to give her kiddushin, to get married. Therefore, the father has no right to give her to a mamzer. So the Gemara says, okay, so mamzer are not, but Rabbi Yehudah si almana kohen gadol. Even Rabbi Kiva agrees that an almana to a kohen gadol is not allowed to marry a widow. But Rabbi Kiva agrees that there is Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, no. We're going according to the opinion of Rabbi Kiva that there is no Kiddushin. Krab Simai. The Tanya of Simai Yomer, Menakol Ayis Rabbi Kiva, Mamzer, Chutz mi Amal Kain Gadol. 1 second. I'm sorry. According to Rav Simai, explaining Rabbi Kiva, an almana to a widow to a Kain Gadol there is Kiddushin. Sure, Amar Torah, because the Torah says, La Yikach V'Leichal. He shouldn't take her so that his children don't become halal. Clearly, that means that he could marry her, because if he would marry her, then the children would be halalim. Typically, we say that because it's a chayvei lavin, there's no kedushin at all, according to Rabbi Kiva. But there's an exception with regard to an almana to a kohen gadol. So the Gemara says, okay, Kirav Yishav, the Amar Bayi v'netzuach al Akiva ben Yosef shei Omer kol she'en lebi Yisrael hadlav namzer. So in other words, the Gemara resolves very simple. You're going with Rav Simai's version of Rabbi Kiva. Rav Simai's version of Rabbi Kiva is that if he would think of it, it's very interesting. The Gemara says it's in his control. Why? Because he could find a kohen gadol and marry her off to a kohen gadol, as if the kohen gadol is like going to take his daughter, Mm-hmm. But then she would be if she was an almana. So not only that. So first she has to become an almana, and then he has to find the kohen gadol that's willing to marry his daughter and violate the law. That's as if that's within his control. But okay, it's a bit of a stretch. But if you go with Rav Yishaviv says even that scenario, there's no Kiddushin. There's no Kiddushin, it's not within your control. Even, let's say you could argue that you could make her into a widow, which itself is a bit wild, right? You don't want any father-in-law like that. And you could find you find the Kohen Gadol to marry her, to invalidate her to a Kohen. So when he says, no, we're going through Rabbi Shav says, let's scream at Rabbi Kiva ben Yosef, let's be victorious, let's be angry at him. It says that basically, if there's any prohibition of a relationship, there's no Kiddushin. So when it says okay, if Rabbi Shav was saying his own reasoning, then it seems that Rabbi Shav is saying that any prohibition at all. In other words, Rabbi Shav is projecting Rabbi Kiva's opinion. He didn't actually know what Rabbi Kiva said. He says there's an opinion that says that even a prohibition of chayve esay. So what's an example of that? Chayve esay is a positive commandment. The Torah says, positive commandment, that if a Mitzri converts, an Egyptian converts, dor shlishi avayohena. You can marry his grandchildren. You can't marry him. Positive commandment. Rabbi Shava would say that even if you found a Mitzri, although there's no Mitzrim today because Sancher messed everybody up. So even if you find a Mitzri, Rabbi Shava says no Kiddushin. Even though it's only the violation of an essay, a positive commandment, still no Kiddushin. However, if Rabbi Shava is actually talking about Rabbi Kiva, he's actually referencing the real Rabbi Kiva. So all he means to argue with is Rav Simoi, meaning Rav Simoi says that Rabbi Kiva agrees with an almana to a Kohen Gadol, there's no Kiddushin. Rav Shava says no. Rabbi Kiva disagrees in that scenario as well. If that's the case, if he's coming just to argue with Rav Simoi, so what he's really arguing about is the prohibition of an almana to a Kohen Gadol. But he doesn't mean to include every chayve esay, every positive commandment. In other words, according to Rav Yishaviv, he could marry off his daughter to a mitzvah or an adaymi, and then in the third generation, they would be able to their children would be able to marry into Jewish people. But for that first generation, because he violated the law, then the children are chalolim, and she also is a chalola. She can no longer marry a kohen. So it's not within his control. Okay, so the Gemara basically is resolving that it still should be within his ability to make her invalid to marry a kohen. How do you do that? You find a mitzvah or an adaymi, you marry off the mitzvah and adaymi, an Egyptian or an Edomite. Okay, so Amar Rav. So now we fall off this resolution. We have a different reason. Amar Rav says, Tizbara, does any of these arguments make sense? Reisha, the first line of the Mishnah when she's a child, you're arguing to me that he's believed to say he married his daughter and divorced her because it's within his control. Hold on a second. Nehi dibiyada lakatsha. It's true, it's in his control to give her kedushin. Biyada lagarsha. Does he have the ability to get a divorce? No. It's up to the husband to give a divorce, not up to him. You're presuming here that he can go find a Kohen Gadol or an Edomite and marry her off to these people. Let's say she doesn't want to violate the law. She says no. Can he force her against her will? Presumably not. Now, this is an interesting line in the Gemara. I think that he could, when she's a child, presumably he could force her against her will. It's only when she's in the period of Naira, that 6-month period between maturity and puberty, between the beginning of the onset of puberty, where he sort of has to gain her consent before marrying her to somebody. Okay, be that as it may, we need to come with a new logic to explain the Mishnah. Why is it that when he says he married off his daughter and divorced her as a child, he's believed, but as an adult, he's not believed? In other words, if he says I married and divorced you as a child when she's currently an adult, he's not believed. Why is that? Torah believes you when your daughter is still a child. Like the opinion of Rav Huna. To Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav, The Funa says the name of Rav. How do we know that a father is believed to prohibit his daughter, meaning to argue that his daughter is married to a specific man, is heiress into a specific man? Shenemar, because the verse states, as gittin asati leish hazeh, I've given my daughter to this man. Hold on a second. As soon as he says, I've given my daughter to a man, she's prohibited to everybody. You know that somebody in the world, leish asra, somebody in the world married her. Now you go say, who married her? Hazeh, this person. All of a sudden, Hitira, you permitted her to now marry this specific man. So Torah says basically you're believed when your daughter is a child to say that you married her to this specific person, but specifically marriage, not with regard, and specifically while she's still a child, but with regard to captivity, the Torah does not provide you with the trust to claim that your daughter was captive and you redeemed her. If you make that claim, you would not be believed, and she would be permitted to marry a Kayan. Together? Was it?
Yeah, it's just odd, but yeah.
Okay, and now we get to one of the classical Talmudic sections where you learn in the yeshivas. Okay, Misham Rishas Misasai. Somebody says at the time that he died, Yeshli Banim, I have children, meaning you're not eligible for Yibum. Or he says Yeshli Achen, or he says I have brother. So if he says Yeshli Banim, he says I have children, then Neman he's believed. She's exempt from Yibum. If he says Yeshli Achem, I have brothers, and now you're eligible for Yibum, Ein Neman he's not believed. And the question is why? Alma Neman Lahater ve'Ein Neman Lasar. We see from here that he's believed to permit her to get remarried without Yibum and Chalitza, but not permitted to require her to do Yibum and Chalitza. Masnisin the like Rav Nosson. Our Mishnah is not like the opinion of Rav Nosson. Tanya we learned the Shots Kiddushin at the time of Kiddushin. Omar he says to her, Yesh lebanim, I have children. If I have children even from a different marriage, then you need not worry about Yibum. B'shas Misa, but however, at the time that he was about to die, Amr he says, "Ein libanim." He says, "It wasn't true. I don't have children. You are eligible." B'shas Kiddushin, Amr Ein le'achen. The time of Kiddushin, he says he has no brothers. B'shas Misa, at the time he dies, he says, "Yesh le'achem." I do have brothers. You are eligible. Ne'eman lahater ve'ein ne'eman lesar. He's believed to permit her without Yibum and Chalitza. In other words, his original statement, I have no brothers. His original statement, I do have children. He's believed to say that. He's not believed to say, I don't have children or I do have brothers. He's not believed. Divrei Rabbi, that's the opinion of Rabbi, which sounds like very much like our Mishnah. However, the problem is in the next part. Nosson Aimer Af Ne'eman Lesar. Nosson says he's also believed to prohibit. In other words, we believe the second statement that he makes. He says he doesn't have children, even though he said before he did. We don't believe him. So this seems to disagree with our Mishnah. Our Mishnah seems to imply he's believed to permit her and not to prohibit her. Rav Nosson Amar Rava says, Shani Hasam Kivin de B'Shas Misika Hadarbe Ema Kushtaka Amar. Rava says it's different. In other words, the scenario of our Mishnah is referring to a scenario where he's not changing his mind. Over here, he has his his deathbed revelation. Like it's always published in the newspapers. This guy, he made this claim his whole life, and now his deathbed revelation. This is what he says. Apparently in Roe v. Wade, I don't know who the protagonists were there, but one of them, I think was it Roe, when she died, she made some revelation. Get the newspapers. And she never really wanted to legalize abortion. Whatever. That's not the point here. The morality of the issue, but he had these deathbed confessions. A guy says on a deathbed, the whole thing was allegedly one of the horoscope writers. He retired. He said, "Oh, by the way, I have no clue what I wrote. I just made it up every day." So here you have a deathbed confession, basically. Okay, deathbed confession. We believe what he says. So that's the difference in our Mishnah. If you don't have a deathbed confession, then, in other words, if you made no statement previously, and now you want to go and permit her, we believe you. If you want to prohibit her, we don't believe you. But if you want to undo what you said previously, the deathbed confession, you thought this, you thought that, no, it's all wrong, then we believe you. Abaye says, hold on, that doesn't make any sense. It's the opposite. Second, the guy who makes a deathbed confession, in other words, he says originally one thing, now he changes his mind on his deathbed. That's less of a reason to believe a guy than when he said nothing for 30 years, and now on his deathbed he says something. At least he's honest. The guy who said nothing for 30 years, now he's about to die, he says, I have a brother. You're telling me we don't believe you. But the guy who says, I did have a brother, and now he says, oh, I didn't have a brother. That makes him more believed. If anything, that should make him less believed. The guy's denying what he said previously. So that's not a reason. Okay. Abaye says, no, it's a different story going on here. Okay, the mission is talking about a scenario where we have no information, we have no reason to presume that he has either brothers or sons. There's no given presumption here about this. There's no rumors, nobody knows. Damrinu, we say, okay, so basically, the status quo is there's no sons, but there's no brothers, which means effectively there's no yibum. The guy says, I have sons. So what's he doing? He's just instantiating what we already know. We already know that he's ineligible, that there's no yibum here because there's no brothers. However, if he wants to deny what the status quo is, he claims that he does have brothers. So we don't believe him to change the status quo. Okay, what about Bryce? So what about the Bryce? So the we've known that he has brothers, but we don't know that he has sons. So the status quo here is she is eligible for yibum. They get married. What does he say? He says, I have sons. Okay, he's believed to have sons. Why is he believed to have sons? Even though the status quo is that he has no sons and he does have brothers, she is eligible for yibum. Why is he believed? Very simple. Because he's able to make her ineligible for yibum. How does he do that? Give her a divorce. Instead of waiting until he dies, he can divorce her. So we say, believe him to say that he has children. Why? Because if he wanted to lie and if he was trying to exempt her from yibum, there's another way to do it. Just give her a divorce. The Armina we say Malar l'shaker. Why? What does he have? What does he have to gain with lying here? My kamar. What's he trying to do? To exempt her from yibum. He could give her a divorce, or he could just say, "I gave you a divorce." That would also exempt her from yibum. Okay, so now this Rebbe Savar Malar l'shaker ki edim domi. Because he has this argument that he's saying the truth, because had he wanted to lie, he could have had a better lie. I divorced you. Very good. We call this amigu. It is amigu. We say that because he has the force of this argument is the equivalent of witnesses. Therefore, the witnesses change the status quo. Until now, the status quo was she is eligible for yibum because he has brothers. Now that he says, well, you're exempt either because I don't have brothers or because I have children, and he's believed to say that. Why? Because if he wanted, he could say, Patran al-Chabagita, I gave you a divorce. So therefore, we believe that statement completely. Now he wants to go and undo it. Well, we don't believe you to undo it. You've changed the status quo. Now the status quo is that you are not eligible for yibum. You want to go ahead and change that? We don't believe it. That's the opinion of Rebbe. Also, Eidim Akar Chazaka. The force of this argument of Malal Shakar of Migu basically changes the status quo. The status quo now is she is exempt from yibum. However, Rav Nosson Savar Malal Shakar ki Chazaka Domile. Also Chazaka Vakar Chazaka Legamri. Rav Nosson says it doesn't change the status quo. It sort of weakens the status quo. So in other words, until he changes his mind, we believe him. He has a chazal. He's claiming, in other words, because he could argue that that he divorced her. Therefore, we trust him to say that she's ineligible for yibum. But the force of that trust is the same level as chazaka, as the status quo. Now that he undoes that, we go back to the original status quo, which is that she is eligible for Yibum, and therefore he's believed. Okay. That was much easier than I thought it would be. Let's go. Next Mishnah. Okay. Hamikadosh is bite stam. Okay, so whatever. Just don't do anything that's written in these Mishnayos. Very bad idea. You'll end up with just stuck with all sorts of problems. Next stupid situation. Okay, what did the guy do? Hamikadosh is bite stam. He marries off one of his daughters. We don't know which daughter. Okay, he has adult daughters. They're 6 months past puberty at least, and he has children or daughters that are within puberty, the first 6 months of puberty. Ein habegeres b'chlal, the adult children are not included. Why? Because he doesn't really have control over them. He doesn't have the ability to marry them off. We'll discuss this more in the Gemara. If you remember, we spoke about the okay. Talk about the Gemara. The guy's married to two women, and he has daughters from both wives. And he says, I married my eldest daughter, but I don't remember what I meant by the eldest. Instead of saying the eldest, we'll use probably the better word to use here is older. Instead of oldest, it would be older. I married an older daughter, but which is the older one? If it was the eldest, or it was a gedela shabbatana, it was the eldest of the younger group. Like Tana shabbatana, or the younger of the older group, which is older than the younger group. Kulan asuras, basically, everybody is prohibited. Nobody can get married, chutz min aktana shabitanas, except for the youngest child. Divrei Rameir, that's the opinion of Rameir. Okay, in other words, according to Rameir, when a guy does something as foolish as this, he basically does it in a very expansive way. And this is one of the points the Gemara will address. In other words, according to Rameir, people like sort of adding everything to the pile, making everything into doubt. And the opposing opinion of Yossi Omer, Kulan Mutaris, to the contrary, they're all permitted. Chutz min agdela shabigdalas. If he says he married off the older one, it means the eldest one. That's the only one. That's the one that is married. Everybody else is permitted. We'll see here. We see here also for Rabbi Yossi, when a guy says a loose statement, he means the most defined version of it possible. He says I married an older daughter. What does that mean? The eldest one. Okay. He says he married off his youngest daughter. We don't know, does it mean the youngest, or does it mean the younger of the older ones? Or the older of the younger ones, because the older of the younger ones is still younger than the older ones, than the two from his wife that's older. Kulan asuras, they're all prohibited, except for the oldest. Divrei Rameir, that's the opinion of Rameir. Rabbi Yossi says the opposite. Kulan mutaris, they're all permitted. Chutz min aktana shabitanis, except for the youngest of the youngest one. The youngest of 1 second. Except for the youngest one. The youngest one's prohibited because when he said it, the youngest one, when he said a younger one, he meant the youngest one. Okay. So the Gemara says, okay. Okay, let's see the first Gemara. This is sort of a review of a Gemara we saw not that long ago. See this first Gemara and then we'll stop. Hak tanes b'chlal. Okay, so let's explain the first line of the Mishnah. The first line of the Mishnah, the guy has, let's say, for argument's sake, the guy has 5 daughters, right? Mm-hmm. And 2 of them are begeres, the one's 17, one's 19, and 3 of them are children. Let's say they were 5 and 8 and 12. And he marries one of them off. We don't know which one it is. It's not the 17 and 19-year-olds. It's either the 5, 8, or 12. 1 second, hold on. You mean that the problem is the guy cannot marry any of those. Why? Because since maybe he married the other one, we say this is a Kiddushin she'ein mesura and labia. This marriage can never be consummated. Why? Because which one of the 3 younger daughters did he marry? We don't know. Which one, that means which one could he marry? None. Because maybe they're the sister of his wife. It's Kiddushin she'ein mesura and labia. It's Kiddushin that he cannot consummate. Have a Kiddushin. So our Mishnah seems to imply that the Kiddushin would be valid anyway, even though you can't consummate the relationship, because there are 3 daughters and each one of them is a sister of potentially the sister of your spouse. So therefore, you can't consummate the relationship. It should not be valid. Evidently, the Mishnah says it is valid. So the Gemara says, no, there are only two daughters. There's an older one and a younger one. It says plural, the older daughters. So the Gemara says, my Baiger is the Alma. It means in general that a person doesn't marry off his older daughters. So the Gemara says, Pshita, Baiger is my Avitayu. 1 second. So the Gemara says, so in other words, why do we need it? Why does the Mishnah need to say it in a plural term? Why is it habaygeres? It should be in habaygeres. Why is it we're talking about plural, multiple baygereses? Multiple. So if the Mishnah was, if the way we understood the Mishnah initially is that there are a reason why there are many older girls is because there are also many younger girls. And the Mishnah is telling me Kiddushin She'em Asur and Labio actually works. Even though the relationship cannot be consummated, the Kiddushin is still valid. But now that we're saying that we're talking about plural baygeres, why is it necessary? So the Gemara says, the older daughter made him a messenger. In other words, made her father a messenger to receive Kiddushin on her behalf. In other words, I would think that he's receiving Kiddushin for his older daughter because he's appointed as a messenger. No, he doesn't receive Kiddushin for his older daughter first. First, he receives Kiddushin for his younger daughters. Why? A person does not leave behind something. In other words, his daughter's Kiddushin he gets to keep. His younger daughter's Kiddushin he gets to keep. The older daughter's Kiddushin he goes to her. She's an adult. So the Gemara says, maybe the scenario could be where the older daughter lets him keep the Kiddushin. The Gemara says, no, it's a person's direct responsibility is marrying off his daughters when they're younger. Obviously, this is not what goes on today, and obviously not the case today. But a person's responsibility is for his younger daughter first, not for his older daughter, and therefore, he has the option of marrying his own daughter first versus his older daughter. He marries his own daughter. I'm sorry, he marries his younger daughter, or both his daughters. He marries his younger daughter over his older daughter. And that's the Mishnah. That's the Mishnah saying we don't presume, even if he's appointed a messenger, we don't presume he's marrying off his older daughter. Obviously, today, presumably this would be different. Okay.